Mercedes-Benz W163 and other Mercedes with the M112 and M113 engines, water pump, thermostat, belt tensioner, and idler pulley. Check the pinned comment for the timestamps. Overview and diagnostics are next. The repair starts at about the 4-minute mark. These repairs are similar or identical on other models with the M112 and M113 engines. You're looking here at this ML500 after all these repairs have been done, but we'll go through this real quick so you have an idea of what's covered in this video. I'm going to show you how to replace the water pump. The water pump is that large, shiny new piece there. This is the water pump pulley. You'll either have an electric fan like you see on this ML500, or you might have a fan clutch threaded on. So the water pump there, I'll show you how to deal with either of those. The other part that you'll see replaced is this one here. That's the thermostat. I'll also show you how to replace the belt tensioner down there. And I will show you how to replace this idler pulley. As far as diagnostics on these parts, we'll start with the big one here, the water pump. For this particular ML, I could see wobble in this pulley with the engine running. It was a slight wobble or walk, but it was apparent. So first I checked to make sure these fasteners that hold the pulley to the water pump were tight. They were, and so that means that the wobble was being introduced by bad bearings in the water pump. There is a weep down here behind this pulley. Unfortunately, you can't see it without removing this pulley, but you will see how to remove this pulley in the video. And that weep is designed to give kind of an advanced warning that the bearings are going out on the water pump. Under normal circumstances, when the bearings are good, the coolant stays on this side. As the bearings fail, it opens up just a little bit and it allows coolant to come out, and then the coolant comes out that weep. It'll either be a very slow leak and you'll just see like coolant residue, or it could be a faster leak and you could actually reach down in here, reach your finger behind the pulley and feel some wet coolant. If you're getting any kind of coolant leaks at the water pump, it's important to address that. Another diagnosis on the pump is if you're hearing some crazy noises from it. There can be some problems with the impeller that's on the inside. If you're seeing any kind of metal in your coolant, then it's definitely important to remove the water pump and have a look at the impeller. As far as diagnostics on the thermostat, I had no reason to believe there was any problem with this thermostat. I just like to replace them when I do any kind of coolant jobs when you already got the coolant drained and all. This is a $20 or $25 part. If your thermostat is failing, it can either fail open, in which case your engine is not getting up to operating temperature and you're not getting any heat in the cab, or it can fail closed, which is your engine's getting way too hot. It's throwing your temperature gauge way up, and you got an overheat problem. So it's an easy job to do. I recommend doing it if you're doing the water pump. As far as the belt tensioner down here, these don't usually fail on the tensioning device. What they usually fail is bearing noise. So when we have all this out and we have the belt off, you can just spin this pulley, and if you're hearing any kind of bearing noise, then it's time to replace this. And lastly, this other little pulley here, this is an idler pulley. This is commonly replaced with this job because this is literally a $9 or $10 part. Very simple, it's just a plastic pulley. We have to remove it to get the water pump off anyway. And like the tensioner, the failure on this is bearings. So if you spin it and you're hearing any kind of bearing noise or it's got any kind of wobble, then it's time to replace it. Before we get started, I want to make you aware of some of the differences between the V8 and the V6. One of the primary differences you'll see is I believe it's only the V8s that have this oil cooler. The reason that's important for your water pump job is because coolant runs through these lines, and so you need that outlet. You'll be able to see this more clearly later. You'll need that outlet when you select your water pump. There's two different water pumps. One has the outlet plugged, and one has the outlet open. So you just need to know in advance whether you have this oil cooler before you order your part. Other than that, the pulley and most of the front engine stuff is just the same. Another difference though is this fan. If you have a 350, you're not going to have an electric fan like this. You're going to have a fan clutch So the removal on that's a little different. I'll show you that as well. But the big thing to remember, if you do have this electric fan, although it's easier to remove and more convenient, this is a hot connection here. So we need to disconnect the negative terminal on the battery before we do any work up here disconnecting this. That's why they have this nice protective cover. You do not need to disconnect the battery if you don't have this type of fan up front, if you have a regular fan. So let's get started here by disconnecting this negative terminal on the battery. This is a 10mm. Once you have that loose, lift this up, and then I like to put a little cap over this so that it does not reconnect. It's important that this isn't going to be touching. So if you don't have a cap ready, just kind of pull the cable out somewhere where you know it's not going to come back, and then maybe zip tie it off. Next, we're going to drain the coolant. Make sure that the engine is totally cool before you do this. We're just going to open this up. This will allow the coolant to drain a little faster. You can leave the lid on, just keep it open. To drain the coolant from the system, there's too much variety between all the different models over the many years and the different aftermarket parts and the Mercedes versus the aftermarket. Some of them you'll see a drain plug like this on the front, and it's like a petcock kind of drain plug, so it'll typically drain perpendicular to where the plug is, so you got to find the hole. Sometimes you need a pliers to turn them. They look like sometimes they're red plugs. There's too much variety. But if you can find your drain plug, obviously use that because it'll be a lot cleaner than the method I'm going to show, which is to simply disconnect the lower radiator hose from the radiator. It's going to be messy, but it will drain quickly, that's for sure. Very, very quickly. But it'll work on all the models. That's why I'll show that way. Now we're down here on the passenger side. Here's the fan shroud. This is the lower radiator hose. This is a 7mm. So I'll go ahead and remove this, loosen it anyway. You can slide that hose off. It's going to be coming out of the radiator as soon as we disconnect this hose, and it's going to be coming out of this hose. So what I'm going to try to do is clamp this hose and then put my fastest funnel in the radiator. So just, I don't know, maybe some attempt to kind of control the mess. So you don't have to do this. You can always just open it up and let it dump into a drain pan, but let's see if this works. I'll go ahead and clamp this hose. Okay, here we go. Got the coolant situation cleaned up, and now we're down here. I just put some bags on these, you can see. We'll go ahead and undo these fasteners here. For the fan shroud, there's a 10mm here, and then another one just like it in the same position down there. And then there's these clips. We'll do this 10mm first. So here's this one, and then the other one it's right down there, same spot. And then these clips here, here's one of those clips, and it seems to work to kind of go in behind it with the little flathead and kind of pop it out. It's got some pretty sharp parts on it, and then work it out. And there's 3, so one here, here, and then down there. Then the last 2 clips are these ones here where those 10mm bolts were. Gotta get in there and pop these out on each side. Okay, so there's that one, and I'll do the other side too. So again, for the fan shroud, you should have the 2 10mm bolts, they're clips, and then the 3 clips there. Back up top here, I'm going to be replacing the thermostat, which is this unit here, that fastener down there. That is one bolt, and the other bolt is that one there. And this whole housing comes out, and then you have to disconnect this hose, put it on your new housing, and put it back in. I know I'm not going to be able to disconnect this here because I've had trouble with this hose in the past at that connection. So I'll have to disconnect it out on the bench. So instead, I'm going to disconnect the other end of the hose right here where it reaches the radiator. There's our little 7mm. When you're working over here, be careful of this hose because it goes onto a plastic feature on the radiator that's pretty easy to break, and if you end up breaking that, it's going to be a radiator replacement. There might be a little coolant that leaks because although we drain the radiator, there might be some coolant high up in here that's just waiting to leak, but hopefully not. All the mess we had earlier. All right, just a very tiny little bit. Now we can disconnect the electrical for the fan. Make sure again that you've got your battery disconnected before you go in here. And we'll start here with this little connection. You can see on the top there's a part to pinch in. And I'm just going to go under with a pry to kind of push it up while I press that in. That's because there's a lot of old plastic. It's brittle. You don't want to break anything. Okay, there it goes. All right. Now this little fastener there, that's a T8, but you can probably get in there with a little Allen key too. So we'll just remove this. This is just a fastener for the cover. There's that tiny fastener, and now this cover just lifts up. Again, make sure your battery's disconnected. Here we have a 10 millimeter, and here we have a 13. Put that to the side. Now we can just pop these off, and I'm going to put these both back on here so that I don't lose these. Now I'll just trim this zip tie. There we go. Before I continue, I'm going to take this dipstick out because I have busted them off before, and it's not a fun feeling. Now quickly here, I will show you what you'll be looking at if you have a 112 or a 113 that has a fan clutch instead of the electric fan, which you just saw on the 500. You can see this is different. We have this fan clutch here threaded directly by this big nut onto the water pump through the water pump pulley there. If you're familiar with removing fan clutches, I'll just give you the info on this. This is a 36 millimeter. It is a right hand thread. You're going to turn it counterclockwise, that is to say towards the passenger side of the vehicle, to remove this. If you're not familiar with fan clutches, that's okay. I did a full video. I'll put up a thumbnail of what that video looks like here. I did a full video to show you all the tips and tricks that I could think of and the different tools that you might be able to rent to remove the fan clutch. I'm very well aware that fan clutches can be pretty tough sometimes. You sometimes get lucky, sometimes you don't, and it can be a little bit frustrating. So I made that video to try to step you through the different possible hurdles that you might encounter and to show you the different tools. So I won't reproduce that video here. Instead, just reference it. Go to the link in the pinned comment or in the description, and hopefully that video will get you where you need to be as far as removing this. So we'll go ahead and go back to the 500. Now the only thing holding the fan shroud in place are these little alignment bosses here. And then there's one on the other side in the same spot, but on this side there's a little trick to clearing the inlet on the radiator. You got to reach down and kind of pull the fan shroud back while you're pushing up in order to clear that. So I'll see if I can show you sort of what I mean. I'm going to kind of pull it out a little and push up, okay? It just popped. Sorry I hit the camera, but that's what you're going for, to pop it out of that alignment boss. And then on this side, same deal. And you got to watch it because you run out of real estate coming into the that power steering cooler line. So just kind of bring it up, and then once you've got it in a spot, you can wiggle it out. So let's see if now I can sort of wiggle it out. And I feel like I'm free on this side and over here. Okay, so I'm free. It's heavier than you would think because it's got the fan in it and that controller. So let's see, I might actually decide to go down with it. Let's see, I can go down. Let's see. Okay, yeah, looks like I'm going down. That's an easier path. Okay, so I just lowered it, and that'll still give us plenty of room. There's the fan shroud. You see I just pushed it down and out of my way. I was catching too much over here on those transmission cooler lines, so this will work for me. I put a piece of cardboard here and just reused a couple of those clips that we took off earlier from the bottom. of the fan shroud just to protect the radiator while I'm working. Now we can easily get the belt off in this position and do our work, but before taking the belt off, I'm going to use a 10mm to loosen these 4 bolts on the water pump pulley. That's the water pump pulley. It just makes it a little easier when the belt's on, because the belt will kind of hold it in place for us. And those aren't too tight. Alright, I just want them loose. Now to remove the belt, we just need a 17mm socket, 12 point preferably, to fit on a specialized feature that's below this tensioner pulley. That's the tensioner pulley there. And I'll show you with the camera. You can easily get the camera down in there. Can't see this too well, but you can see it with the camera. That's it there. And that looks like a 17mm 6-point, but it's actually a feature on the tensioner assembly. So we can get a tool on there and then turn counterclockwise. That will pivot this tensioner pulley so that we can slide the belt off. All this grime and oil down here is from an oil cooler seal leak. Probably both. It's probably this 500's probably got both of those little seals that leak on the cooler or the filter housing, so I'm going to replace those two. So let's get our 17mm and get the belt off. This is probably the best angle for you. So I like to put the socket on first because I use a 12-point socket, so I got a little bit more room to navigate, and then obviously it's got a square drive because we need to be able to get enough of an angle to actually turn this. So let's see. Looks like I probably got lucky there. Alright, so you can see I'm on it there, and now I'm going to move counterclockwise, and you can see how the belt is loose now. I can slide it off wherever. Alright, and now you can put a pin in there. Get the focus back there. You can put a pin in there to hold it, but I'm just going to go ahead and release it. I'm going to get my 17mm out of there. Looks like my socket's stuck on there. And I'll go ahead and grab this belt. You might be able to tell I spent quite a bit of time cleaning up there. We can see a lot more of the water pump and all now that the belt's off. But if we remove this pulley, remember we loosened these already? It's just gonna come right off. So there is the water pump. And the reason this is getting replaced is because I noticed there was a lot of walk on the pulley movement when with the belt on, just looking in, and I can feel there's some play there. I don't know if you can hear that. You can see here, this is that's the bleed. Just to make it easier for me to record for you and get better lighting, I'm going to take out this secondary air pump. You don't have to do this to reach these items. It'll give you some more room, but you don't have to remove it. So there's just this is a bracket right here. This is a ground point. So there's this fastener that's an E10. This hose just pulls up, and then this electrical. So to get this electrical, you just squeeze in the sides. You got to squeeze it pretty hard because the little clamps are all the way at the bottom, and kind of wiggle it up. Okay, there it goes. And then this is an E10. Long bolt here. And I'll just put that to the side for the moment. And then this slips up here, off like this. Okay. And then this rocks out just like that. So you don't have to do this, it just gives a little more room. With that out of the way there, you can see the bolts for the thermostat. So those are E10s. I'm going to go ahead and go on there. I'm just going to crack one and then go to the other side and crack the other. Okay. Working around the camera. They're not very tight. Even after I pull these out, the thermostat housing is still going to be kind of stuck here. So those are those two bolts there. Again, just to give myself a little more room, I think I'm just going to disconnect the electrical here for the coolant temperature sensor. I could probably take it out, but it occurs to me that I don't have an extra O-ring for this, so I'll just go ahead and disconnect the electrical. So at least that's out of my way. Hopefully I don't break anything. There it goes. If you are going to remove it, you pull up on this clip and then it pulls out. And then when you put it back in, you just make sure you kind of have it at that angle so the electrical can reach. We are going to have to work around this. So when the water pump comes out, we don't want to go this way and smack that. But for the thermostat, it looks like it'll clear it. If not, I will take it out and try to source an O-ring. See if I can get this thermostat to come out a little. It's on there pretty well. It's just, I can see it's just moving a little, but it's not coming just yet. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so didn't need to pry after all. Looks like the gasket's coming with it. That's good. A little bit of coolant leaking out. I'm going to go ahead and grab this gasket and I'll pull this up. There you can see it's pretty grimy around where that gasket for the thermostat seats. So before I put in the new thermostat and gasket, I'm going to clean that up. I'm not going to use any type of steel tool because, as you know, if you've tried to stick a flashlight on this engine, this is not a steel engine. It's not cast. It's some type of aluminum alloy. So you can scratch it easily. So use a plastic tool or something benign and just take your time to get this surface cleaned up. I cleaned this up as much as I could and I just put a paper towel inside a bag, shoved it in there so nothing falls in those open holes. And now we'll remove this bracket. This bracket is bolted to the water pump housing, so if we don't remove it, it's just going to come out with the whole thing and we'll eventually have to disconnect it. So these are more E10s. So that's those two bolts there, and you can see this just, we can just put to the side. I wanted to point out that you might see some metal shavings when you remove the bolts for the bracket. These holes don't go into the block, they just go into the housing of the water pump, and there it tapers, and so when we go to install it, you'll see it'll be really hard to turn them in. That's because it's going to recut grooves into the new aluminum on the water pump. So that's why they're kind of hard to pull out, and they will leave some metal shavings, but it's nothing to be alarmed about. Make sure you label your bolts, because we'll make a template for the bolts for the water pump, but you don't want to be mixing up the bolts. There's going to be different lengths and they're going to have to go back in their particular positions. So these bracket bolts, label them, same with the thermostat bolts, and then we'll make a template for the water pump bolts. Now we're going to remove this idler or guide pulley. Underneath this cap there's a big bolt, so we're just going to use a pick, a screwdriver, whatever you got to get behind this cap. Pop it out. Alright. And here's a big bolt. That is a T50, so we'll remove that. This is a good time to replace this pulley if you've never replaced yours. Let's see. There we go. Not crazy tight. Long bolt. And there's our pulley. Here's the new water pump, and it's a graph, and again, you're going to pick yours depending on whether you have an oil cooler or not. You can see I made a template. I just put this down on the cardboard and traced around it with a pen. And then I went through with a screwdriver in not all of the holes, but many of the holes to place the screws. The reason I didn't go through all of the holes is because, for example, you don't need this hole on an automatic. This is for some type of strut that's found on manual transmissions, I believe. This one is the one we already removed for the pulley. This one is for the alternator. It's nice to have a place to put them when you take them out. So if you've got these little holes and you take out the bolt that's in, this hole, go to your template and put it in there. These holes I did not punch. Those would be there because those are the holes for the bracket. This here might be helpful, so I'll put this up as a slide so you can review this more carefully. The only bolt we have right now is this pulley bolt, so I'll just put that in there like so, and now we'll do the alternator bolt. This here is the alternator bolt. You can see the alternator here. This is part of the water pump housing. It serves as a bracket, as I mentioned earlier. This is going to be the tightest bolt, and that's going to be also the only E14. So we'll get on here with an E14. And this sucker might be pretty tight. Yeah. And this is another long one. It's got long threads, so it takes a while to get it out. And there is the alternator bolt. And our alternator bolt goes there. Now you might notice here I got some white marks that I made. This is the hose that goes this way over to the auxiliary water pump. And then this is the big hose that goes to the radiator. I made a mark here. I also made a mark on the hose that goes to the thermostat that I'll show you a little later. So now we're going to disconnect some hoses. We got another 7mm clamp right here. Might not be able to see it from the camera, but right next to it, right there, is a fastener for the water pump. So we got to get this out of our way. So there it goes. All right. Get this, push this back. Let's see if I get lucky. Let me get a pick. Using a pick, make sure you don't poke a hole in the hose. So, since we're not going to be reusing this water pump, it's okay if you scratch the water pump, but not so good if you poke a hole in the hose. So try to keep the point towards the aluminum the best you can. I'm going to grab my pry. Looks like I got enough pry. There we go. All right. Hoses are always so much fun. There we go. Okay. Thought I'd have a little bit more slack, which is why I left this little clamp on here. Not this, but this here. But I don't have as much slack as I thought, so I'll go ahead and open that. You probably want to do that first, then you'll have a little bit more room. What I mean is that with that out, you'll be able to pull that back. Now for this one here, this is such a short hose. Let's see. Let's put this up there. I don't think I'm going to have enough room to do anything with this bottom clip, so I'll have to disconnect it here. So I'll go ahead and go around this with the pick, so at least that's loose. And then when the water pump comes out, maybe that's when I'll be able to get it off. I zip tied this clamp in because it keeps getting in my way, and also as soon as I disconnect it, it's going to fall down. So that way, at least I know it'll be in the right place. Let's go around this with the pick. It's probably the best I'm going to be able to do with the camera. I've got my template up sitting on top of the, here it is here, sitting on top of the intake, and I'm just going to go ahead and start breaking these free. I wasn't able to find any type of loosening sequence, so we're going to do just the typical for loosening spiral in. So we'll start from the edges and move towards the center. That'll be the next one there, and then so I will go here, here, and then actually I'll go here and then over there and crisscross and whatnot. I'm going to have to change tools a few times because these are different sizes. For any particular one of these, I'm only just going to crack it open, not loosen any one particular all the way. So here's this one here. Okay, there's that. Now I'm going to come over here. That's also an E12. Okay, now I'll crisscross back over. And is there one here? There's not one there. Looks like those are actually going to be 10s. Come back here. go over here. This is a 10. Okay, and then back over here. And so forth. And this one will go down here next. And over here. And up here. I'm just going to keep going around a little bit at a time and make sure that I have all of them loosened before I am removing any one of them. There are so many of them. Looks like I got all 14. They're just hanging in there. I'm gonna count to be sure. So I guess we'll start here. Yeah, there's our reference for the bracket. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then down here is 5, and over here, over there, 6, my finger's on it, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and the one down in here, right there, 14. So now I'll go ahead and remove them one at a time and put them in the right spot in my template. All the fasteners are out and in the template, and I put down a trash bag just to cover the controller and stuff on the fan, since I have the fan down there and not all the way out of the engine bay. So I'll try to remove this. There shouldn't be much of an issue to remove it because I think this uses the metal gasket, and so I'm just going to have to watch this part here on that feature, and again, if I need to, I'll remove that. So let's see, here we go. Remember, I'm going to have to slip it off of that, but I want to see if I can get it moved back a little bit. Let's see. There it goes. A little bit of coolant. Okay. Now I'm just going to kind of move around. You saw I just kind of moved around that. Oh, did you see? Hold on, sorry. I just wiggled around. I just wiggled around this. It was not a big deal. Okay, so loose everywhere except for this oil cooler. So let's see, how am I going to do that? Let's see if it'll pull off. Okay, maybe, hopefully you can see here. I've already loosened up that hose. Okay, yeah, it's coming now. Great. Okay. Alright. Wiggle. Watch that sensor. Okay. And I'm coming out. I'm bringing this whole radiator hose with me, so. Alright, there we go. Hot dog. Alright, so there you can see the metal gasket here. Hopefully this will just pop off and I won't have to take little bits of it. But let's see. I think this part over here, yeah, this little finger hold over here. So far so good. There we go. Nice. This will obviously require some cleaning up before we come back in with the new gasket. So I think I'll probably go ahead and just put a little baggie there to protect that in here, and maybe over there to protect the openings from me dropping any dirt in there. So the next step is to get this all cleaned up. That took a very long time to get this surface clean. I ended up using my Permatex gasket remover. This is the low VOC one. I've used this before on aluminum heads and lots of aluminum parts. I haven't had a problem with it. When you're done using it, just wipe down all the surface so you don't have any more of it left on there. It's got a brush on this end, and so I'm pretty much out of it now. I didn't use the whole bottle, but I had a bottle here already from other jobs. You press this and a little bit of foam will end up on this brush, and you just kind of put it around where you need to have the gasket dissolved, and then leave it for a little bit, and then come back, and then you can use a plastic scraper. You don't want to use anything, or a nylon brush, something. You don't want to use anything that's going to mar up the metal, because if you end up with a scratch or a gouge, then that's going to be a place where you might have a leak. Another thing I recommend to do is to get some Q-tips and to go into each of these bolt holes. These small ones especially, because those are the fasteners that are most likely to break. This is all aluminum again, and the fasteners are steel, so they will wear some of the threads. So when you put this, you can see how dirty that is. You put this in there and I spin it counterclockwise as if I'm unscrewing the fastener, so it'll sort of catch the threads, and you'll see it'll bring out all kinds of stuff. It'll bring out all kinds of dirty stuff and lots of little bits of aluminum. And then you can of course shoot it with compressed air. While you're working in this area, you want to cover up this hole here, that one there, and that one down there, just to prevent anything falling into those channels for the coolant. I also recommend to take the time to clean the bolts. I clean the heads with the brush, and I also clean the threads of each of the bolts. The reason is because the same way you'll see all kinds of stuff in the holes from the aluminum, you'll see some things on the threads. I see that I need to fix this, because this is this heat shield on this wiring here. You see I put this in this hole here because if I don't do something about this, this is so brittle. This is pieces that's going to break off, and it might end up in that hole when I'm moving that around. You can see this is just totally brittle. If you also need to do this, you can get this heat shield at Harbor Freight. It's real cheap, and this smaller size will work. You just open it up in the back and put it right over. And then just put in a couple spots, just put a little electrical tape to keep it closed. Here's the old water pump, and we're going to need to transfer this hose and obviously the big hose onto the new one. So I'm just again going to use these hose clamps. These work really well on these clips. If you use channel locks or something on these clips, just be careful because it's pretty easy for them to go flying. And then I'll go around here with the pick. Once I went around with the pick, I was able to free it. And so this one here, let me see, that's going to be another 7mm. I'm going to have to go around this carefully with the pick as well. This is on there pretty tight. I've been around the whole perimeter now with the pick. And okay, now I can get it off. Alright, so you can see here that there was some coolant coming out of that bleed hole or weep hole. This hole, yeah, you'll be able to see, well actually you won't be able to see. On the inside here, just take a look with your own eyes. It's going to be too hard to show on the camera. You can see the bearings in there, and so the coolant's on this side. When the bearings are good, they should keep water, the coolant, on this side. When they start to go bad, you'll get some coolant leaking out this side. So that's the idea of this. It's just to kind of give you an advance warning. On the old water pump here, I'm going to grab this side and I'll show you that play. You'll be able to hear it too. Hear that? So this water pump was definitely on its way out. Might have been the original. It is a Mercedes part. You can see the part number there. And this Mercedes part is much higher quality than the replacement part that I got, unfortunately. Even though I got a graph, I did get a graph made in Italy. I got a graph. Then there's the part number PA710, but the reference is this number here from anywhere where you'll get this, whether it's FCP Euro or Autohouse AZ or whoever else, many other of the European auto parts resellers. It's the real deal, supposedly. Hopefully it's not counterfeit, but it's not as nice as I was expecting based on other Graf pumps that I've had in the past. So it's wet because I washed it off. I always wash off new parts, especially water pumps, because of the machining and little bits come in. You can see right off the bat that doesn't have this hose stop right here. That's missing there. I also prefer this design for the hose compared to this one here. Just overall, you can see it's a real rough sand. It's cast aluminum that's then machined, and the cast is just real sandy compared to the original. The bearings do look good, but the big thing that surprised me was this here. There's two pieces, and that's just surprising. I will show you what I mean real quick. The difference, see there? See how that's two pieces there, and that's one piece. And you can see there's a radius here, but on this one it's a corner because they got those two pieces coming together. But I did verify that it's a Graf, so, and you'll see pictures of Grafs online from other resellers with this same feature here. The machining's fine. I mean, my finger's not catching on any of this. This is obviously cast from a different part and put in here. This is much smoother. I would have preferred the whole thing be like that, but whatever, it is what it is. I'm gonna have to use this part because this is the part that I have, and hopefully I won't have to be going back in here. The gasket surface does feel good though, and I did check. It's always a good idea to use if you have a Mercedes gasket, to use that to check your aftermarket part. I did. Everything lines up really well, and it did come with the new gasket here. It also came with the synthetic gasket, and we don't need that for this application. Now we'll transfer the hose. If you do have this oil cooler, you'll notice this one doesn't have a hose stop. The OE one does, which is another reason why the OE one is better, but hopefully I won't have any problems with this. We'll see. I really hope it's not counterfeit. That would be no fun. I'll put this clamp on about the same spot as where it was before. And then I'm just making sure that I do have that towards the front, so if I have to get in there in the future, it's easier to grab that clamp. And I did clean the hose to make sure that I didn't knock, or if I did knock any of that goop and grime and dirt from when I was going around with the pick, that it doesn't stay in the line. So I think I'll just leave that like that. I'll put the hose clamp here, but I'm not going to tighten it all the way. Another thing you might check, I've seen comments online about sometimes people having trouble tapping these. These holes are the only holes, if any of them, where you might not be able to get a fastener through right out the box. And the reason is because they taper, and then the idea is to have this thread into this housing. These bolts don't go through. This is just for the bracket, remember. This is just for that bracket. You can see it tapers, but there's no threads. And then this one here, you might be able to see some threads, or maybe I'll do this on that. There, you can see some threads, and that's because I just took one of the fasteners for the brackets. That's this one here. It's smaller than any of the other ones. It's smaller than even the smallest one for the water pump. And you know, if you want, you can just kind of get it started while you have it out, and you'll just bring it in. You'll get some resistance. If you start having trouble, back it out, and then just blow air through the hole to get any of the loose aluminum bits out, and then go in again. You don't need to use an actual tap on these because it's aluminum. You don't want to go too hard though, that you would break the fastener. So you just go in, and this is how you can tap them. They're considered self-tapping, presumably because it's aluminum. And then you can just You can do it when it's installed, but it might be a good idea to do it when it's out too. That's probably pretty good. So we should be good there. You can see there that it will put threads right into that. And lastly, I'm just going to kind of fit this gasket just to double check, and this gasket looks real good. It looks, quality of the gasket looks a lot better. So make sure that all the holes are going to line up on the gasket. Oops. And they are. There we go. They are. So we're good. We'll put this to the side for the moment, and we'll move over to the thermostat. I got to break this free on the thermostat. This is 7mm again. And then I'm going to have to go around with the pick. I forgot to mention I did make this mark because I want to have this mark lined up with the center on the new thermostat. And again around here with the pick. There we go. Okay, I'll pull this thermostat out. I don't have any reason to believe the thermostat's bad. I just am doing it since I'm doing all the rest of this. And this is the replacement thermostat. This is an OE maker. There is the part number again. I got this from Autohaus AZ, and you can see here that it's Germany and Wahler, just like the original there. See where it says Wahler. Now that one, it does have the part number in that top spot, and then Germany, they just milled out the part number. So I don't have any worries about this. Comes with the gasket. Now I'll go ahead and get this on. Get my little mark lined up. Okay. And I will put the clamp in place and tighten it a little bit, but I'll do the final tightening later. All right, new water pump and new thermostat are ready. Now just make sure that the surface is all clean and it's ready for your gasket. The gasket only fits one way. And then to hold it in place while we're putting it on, I'm going to put those ones that I have sticking out G. So if we turn it this way to get our orientation. That's all I mean with putting those through there to hold it. And now we'll go in with the install. This gets a little tricky because remember we got to work around this thing. It'd be a lot easier if I had an O-ring for that and I could remove it. And then we have to get back on. As you can see, we have to get back on that. So got the gasket in place, got one fastener kind of holding the gasket a little bit for me, and then my finger is through the other one. So I think I'll try reverse order is how we removed it. We came off of that last, so there I'm slipped on there. I'm not all the way on there, but I'm slipped on there, and I have to go a little more to a little bit more. There we go. Okay, now I gotta work around this. Put this down. And work around that. Okay. And the gasket looks good. I'm lining up. Now I'm going to push more into that hose there so that hopefully I can get a fastener through. Through the gasket, and we get a hole to line. I can see. I'm going to have to grab this fastener and get my hand out of the way and put it through that hole for the other G. There. Okay. Now that one's in. That one's in the hole, and that one's in the hole. I can get my fingers out of there, and I'm just going to turn these in hand tight. So I think you might not have been able to see that, but this here, that's where that G goes, that other long one. So we've got this one in and this one in, and they're just hand tight. And so I'm going to do this one next, which is a D. It's this big one that goes over in this corner. And then I'm just going to go around placing them as they need to be according to the template, and just put them in hand tight. But place them all first before you tighten down any of them. Even hand tight, place them all first. I'm placing this E one. Make sure that this is not getting smushed. cleaning the cardboard off the threads in case any gets on the threads before I put them in. And C is going to go right down. So that's E we've done. C is going to be right down here. So again, those C's were here, here, and here. Now all I have left are the 7 B's. I've got them all in hand tight. And remember, of the B's and the C's, which are the E10 socket, there's 7 of the B's and 3 of the C's, so that's 10 total. So to count those out, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, way under here, 6, way down here, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then of the E12s there are 4, 1, 2, and then way down here on this side, 3, 4. So just get all those in hand tight. I want to make a quick explanation here in case you're looking at a copy of the WIS and you're wondering about the torque values that we're going to use for these little fasteners on the water pump. The WIS will print like this. You can see there's 2 sets of values. This set up here is larger values of 14 and 35 Newton meters, and it has a note thread not pre-tapped. This set is 10 and 25 Newton meters and has a note thread pre-tapped. We're going to ignore this on the top here. The reason is because those values that I'm covering now with the pencil are only if you're working with a brand new timing case cover. We're not doing that in this application. Most people will never ever have to replace their timing case cover. So we're going to go with those smaller values. The reason is because the timing case cover from Mercedes new is not tapped. And as you can see over here, Mercedes considers those bolts that we remove to be self-tapping screws. And so in the case that you're at the factory installing the timing case cover, that's what you're using, those larger values. We're not doing that. We're just reusing our same timing case cover. That's that big cover on the front of the engine that covers the timing chain and everything. So that's why we are using these smaller values. So I've got those values crossed out because we don't need them. All this is saying here with this M6 and M8 note, that's the screw size. So that's a M6 6mm diameter screw. Those are our smaller ones. With the E10 heads, that's a very low torque value, 10 Newton meters. So don't go crazy on those. The M8s are the larger ones. I think there was just 4 of those, and those are the E12s. And that's a bit higher torque value, but still neither of these torque values are particularly high, so don't go nuts on any of these fasteners as we put the water pump in. Okay, the instructions from the WIS aren't very helpful. It's just reverse, so install is reverse. I am not going to put the alternator bolt on until last, and I'm not going to put the pulley on right now until we get all these fasteners to their final torque, because the pulley will interfere with this. That's also consistent with the way we took it off, right? We took the pulley off and the alternator bolt out before we did these other bolts. So we then have now 2 torque values to be concerned with. Just these. This is for the pulley. We don't need this one right now, so I'll cover it up. We got the E10s, those small fasteners. Those are 10 Newton meters final torque. And then the E12s are 25 Newton meters final torque. So we don't want to bring those all the way straight up to their final torque right away. We want to make multiple passes, starting, if I can get this to focus, starting more or less from the center and spiraling, or more like crisscrossing out. So I've got my torque wrench set to like 65 inch-pounds, which is somewhere between, looks like 6 and 7 Newton meters. That's a value lower than our lowest final torque, which again is 10 Newton meters on these guys. So just kind of starting at the center, like I said, I'm just going to kind of go zigzag, work my way around and out. And I'm not even going to take them all the way up to the value of that I have the torque wrench at right now. I'm just going to get just get them close to the value on multiple passes. That's the name of the game. And then I'll switch over to the socket for the larger bolts, but I won't change the value on the torque wrench. I'll keep it low. Same low value on the torque wrench, like whatever it was, between 6 and 7 Newton meters. And now I have the different socket on to get these larger fasteners. Got the one way down here. That's easy to forget. Those ones on the bottom there, very difficult to see. They're easy to forget. So you get the drill. Just make lots of passes. All right, that one's there. That one's there. Okay. Do my last pass now on the little fasteners. I already did the E12s, got those in, and this is 88. This is 88 inch-pounds, or about 10 Newton meters. So I just went in steps. Definitely use a torque wrench because it would be very easy to. Even with this little short wrench, it'd be very easy to over tighten these little guys. Down here. And so I'll get these last 10 and then make a final pass and we should be good. Okay. This one here. So let's go. Let's start with this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's really hard to reach. 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right. Now we are all set. Okay. We got the water pump fasteners in. Now we'll get the hoses. I'll go ahead and start with this one here. I got that clamped on there, okay. And now we'll move down to this hose. I'm just going to have a look under here to make sure I've got it on evenly before I tighten this all the way down. I checked on the bottom to make sure it looks good and even, and it is. You can see my white mark there. Lines up still with about the center. And I'll just tighten this up here. So that's tightened up, and now it goes back in that little thing here, and you want to just squeeze it until it clicks in like that. Okay, that's important, so that it doesn't end up winding up with the belt. This I haven't cut yet because, like I said, I still got to do some of that underneath. Also, remember to tighten down this one if you left it loose like I did. Now we'll do the idler pulley. I'm going to put on a new idler pulley. I'll put the part number up for that. The bearing sits on this feature on the bolt, so make sure that you've got that lined up as you're turning it in. Torque is 20 Newton meters, or 177 inch-pounds. Idler pulley is on and torque down. Now we can do this alternator bolt. That's that one there. It was the only E14. Torque on this is going to be 42 Newton meters, or 31 foot-pounds. I wonder if the camera's picking it up, but the coyotes are going nuts outside. Alright. Forgot to put this cap on the idler pulley here. That should just snap into place. And then now we'll do this bracket. Remember, that's these small fasteners. Those are E10s. If you disconnected your coolant temperature sensor like I did, make sure you've got that pulled out of the way before you put the bracket up. And then as you're placing the bracket, just make sure you're not pinching anything behind it. Goes into those two holes there, as we know. We can put the pulley back on the water pump. That's this. It goes there, of course, and that's these little fasteners. Those are their regular hex head, 10 millimeters. I'm going to go ahead and turn this so it's 12 o'clock, so I make it easier for me to line one of these holes up. Torque on these is low, it's just 9 Newton meters. You can maybe even hold the pulley, or you can wait until you get the belt on. If you disconnected the electrical on the coolant temperature sensor like I did, you can put that back on. That's just going to snap in place. Snap. Now we'll get the thermostat back in. Now for the thermostat, that's discolored, but it is smooth, so hopefully I don't get a leak there. I even use my gasket remover on there, but it's smooth, but it's still discolored. Make sure you've got a gasket on your new thermostat. Or if you're using your same thermostat, it's recommended to go ahead and replace the gasket, even if you're reusing your thermostat. And then this, so you don't have to backtrack. This part, this part here does not go right here. It goes here. If you turn it to line up with that, you'll kind of get wedged in there. So this part is going here because this bolt hole is going there. So when you're putting it in, keep that in mind, since you can't, have a head-on look at it. It should go in easily, like as it was when it came out. Oh, like so. And get the holes lined up. There we go. We'll get our fasteners. Different look down the thermostat. These are our fasteners there. They're E10s, and torque on these is just 10 Newton meters or 88 inch-pounds. Like all the other places where you have gaskets, go back and forth a little. Don't put in one side all the way. Get them good and going in evenly. And that's it. Don't forget to tighten this hose clamp here for the upper radiator hose. If you remove this air pump, it's time to put that back on. This goes with this part onto that hose here, and then these features right there go in there, so we can just kind of line it up, look under. Okay, it's in, and lift this, make sure that seats on there real well. And then our fastener is here. This is a ground point, so make sure you've got that ground there. And then we just have the electrical. Before you fasten this down all the way, you might want to just keep it loose so you have enough slack. This goes right onto those connections there until it snaps. Sort of snap, but it's on there. Give it a good wiggle, and now you can tack this down. I don't have a torque value for this. If you have one, please post it in the comments. It was not crazy tight, but it is a ground point, so it needs to be snug. That ought to be good right about there. This is a good time to replace your belt tensioner since you're in here doing a lot of other work. Now you're looking at the 350 right now, so this is the 112 engine, but it's just the same on the ML500. I'm not replacing the one on the ML500, but I'll go ahead and show you here what we need to do to get this tensioner off. There's a fastener here you can see that looks like that's an E12, and then there's another one that's back here. We just need to move the pulley and lock it out with a pin to be able to reach that other fastener. I'm going to try my best to work around the camera here. What we're going to do is get back on here with the 17, turn it counterclockwise, and then as we turn this, there'll be a little spot. This spot, in fact, right here. This is where you're going to line up a key, but there's not a hole for it to go into until you have this all the way down. That's the little notch though, so I'll try to work around the camera as best I can. So I'm on there, Go counterclockwise. And now I'm going to use this Allen key. I'm just going to feel for that notch. It's up there now. And just slide it right in. There we go. Okay. Once it's in, you'll be able to release this, and that'll keep the tensioner locked back, and we'll be able to reach another fastener, which is over here. There you can see the Allen key, and if I just swing over there, that's that notch. And it's going through a hole in the housing there. So it's just locking that back. And there you can see we have access to that fastener. So our two fasteners for the tensioner are going to be that one there, and then this one that we could already see up there. I got a little extension on here, and these are E12s. I'm going to crack each one free. I'll go down here. I'm going to get an extension. I don't want to knock that pin. Alright, now we'll get on here. Not very tight. Now I can go grab these both. Let's hold the pulley here and turn this out. And there we are. And there's our tensioner. So there's our tensioner. You can see the part number on here. It is lead-ins, however you say that, 0113, and then over here it says 950113. And again, there's that groove that you're kind of feeling for to get your hex on, and then into that hole there. There are our two fasteners. So if you are replacing this, you would now grab your new one. I'm just going to put this one right back in. So we're going in there and there, and I always like to clean these, especially these self-tapping ones. You can see all this stuff that'll come out, a whole bunch of aluminum. I just don't want anything that's going to increase the likelihood of getting a bolt break. Something else I want to mention while we're down here, if you find this area is all filled up with oil on yours, if you have an oil cooler on your engine, it's probably the oil cooler seals or the seal that goes between the oil filter housing and the timing case cover. Check the pinned comment for a link. I'm going to do that on that ML500. You saw all that grime and stuff that was down there before I cleaned it up, so I'm going to do those seals. The other place that could leak and give you that kind of collection is this right here. This is real easy to replace. This is an E10 and this is an E10. This comes right off. There's a gasket behind here, but this is another one since it's right above here. When oil drips down, it'll make this big puddle there. So we can go back in with our tensioner now and mind the orientation. I'm going to get this top bolt in first so that I can free up one of my hands. Okay. I'll grab this second bolt. You can see it from above. You can't see it on the camera, but you can definitely see it from above. Get back in here. Torque on these is going to be 25 Newton meters or 18.5 foot-pounds. There it is. There it is. Now at this point, if you have a shorter pin, you probably leave it in and slip your belt on later and then remove it. I don't like having this here when I'm putting the belt on, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull that pin out, and then I'll deal with the tensioner later when we put the belt on. I'll sneak back in here. Okay, I'm going to turn left just that little tad bit to pull this out. Pull it out and then slowly release it without hitting the camera. Oop, I gotta move the camera. There we go. Alright. Next here we'll put on the belt. I'm going to be reusing this belt. It's a Mercedes belt. I need to replace it soon, but I can reuse it for now. Here is our belt diagram. You're not going to be able to see things all together too well. So I suggest you print out a belt diagram or at least have it on your phone or something. I'll start by looping around the crankshaft pulley here, and I'll leave the camera there as long as I can work around it. Make sure you're getting the belt into the grooves on the pulleys that do have the grooves. Some of them you'll be on the rear side of the belt, and some you'll be on the back side. All right, then we are over the top, so coming 12 o'clock clockwise around from the crankshaft pulley. We are going around the tensioner pulley, and then we're coming up over the back. Oops, there was my light. Okay, over the back of the water pump, and then we're down around the alternator. Okay, and then we're up over the idler, which is probably where I'll choose to slip it on. And then this side going to go all the way over here around the power steering pump. Okay, I'm just going to actually leave this. I guess I'll put it on the track, but I don't have the tensioner locked back, so I'm not going to be able to actually place the belt onto all the pulleys until I've got the tensioner pulled back some. And then this last part, I need to get around the bottom of the AC compressor, so I'm just going to slip off here so that I got enough slack to get around the AC compressor. And that's okay. And I'll check my grooves all around. I'm going to stay on that tensioner because I find it's easier to slip onto this. So this is our almost complete belt path. Okay, like I said, this is where I'll slip it on. I'll slip it on here onto this side of that idler pulley, but the rest of the routing is correct. So just to show, going around the crankshaft up on the back side, belt runs on the back side of that tensioner, up over the water pump, that's this one here, down around the bottom of the alternator, up, and then it will go over here eventually. Top runs over here to the power steering pump, make sure that it's in the grooves, then it runs down to the AC compressor, make sure it's in the grooves, and then around and back to the crankshaft. So remember our 17 millimeter feature down there on our tensioner. That's where I'm going to stick the socket next. Got my 17 millimeter 12 point, and it's going to reach down here to find that feature. There it is right there. There we go. Okay, that ought to do it. Yeah, okay, and there we are. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the grooves. Make sure I'm in the grooves there. And I'm seated well there. And then I'm just checking around while I have it back, the rest of the pulleys, and it looks good. I'm going to slowly release it back. Alright, and now I'm going to take a closer look to be sure. Do a final check. There's the crankshaft there, and up and around the tensioner, over here to over the top of the water pump pulley, around the alternator, up and over the idler, around underneath here, over to the power steering pump there, around and down to the AC compressor, and then back over to the crankshaft. So our belt routing is good. Now if you didn't already tighten these 10 millimeters on the water pump, what was it, 9, I think it was just 9 Newton meters, so you can see not very tight. It's like 80 inch-pounds. Now we'll put the fan shroud back in place, whether you took yours out or you just moved it down like I did. I'm going to pull it back and make sure that it's not touching the radiator before I pull my cardboard out, and then carefully get it into place. There are a couple sharp spots that might be a threat to the radiator if they hit it hard enough, so you don't want to punch a hole in the radiator moving the fan shroud around. And remember, it's just going to kind of come up and go over this rim, and then we've got these alignment bosses, which we get a better look at as it gets closer to being in place. Just keep space between it and the radiator. Okay. Sorry about this camera angle on this, but it's really the best I can do because I can't work around the camera. I checked it and it's good, so I'm just going to give it this last little final lift to get it over the lip, and then I should be able to get it into the alignment bosses. Let's see. All the way into the alignment bosses, I should say. There we go. Okay. Looks good. That's the one there on the driver's side. And that is the one on the passenger side. We're back under here. Now, if you did use the drain plug, whatever yours happens to look like, if you have one, make sure you have that closed. We will connect this in a second. First, we'll get these clips back in here for the fan shroud. So you gotta kind of push this in and then slip it on. And then this is a 10mm. There's this one and then the one on the other side. We also had 3 of these little clips. There, that one's a little better. We got the 2 10mm and the 3 clips in for the fan shroud. Now we can get this lower radiator hose back where it needs to be, connected to the radiator. It's a good idea to, we'll put the band back, you know, sort of where it was. It was about like there. It's a good idea to clean up the coolant that's spilled. There is a hose stop there, so you'll push it up to that point. If you take the time to clean up the coolant that you spilled, that way, if you do develop a coolant leak later, you'll be able to tell, oh, it's new, it's not from the repair. So it takes a little extra time, but it's worth doing. And there's that all buttoned up. And for our last hose connection, connect that upper radiator hose to the radiator, get that snug. Now we can get the electrical back together for the fan. Remember, we just had this 13 and this 10. I don't have any torque values for this, but these are studs, so it's an electrical connection. It needs to be snug, but you don't want it so tight that you break the stud. If you have a torque value, please put it in the comment section. Then we have this little cover, and that was this tiny little T8 fastener. Lastly, we have this electrical. It only fits one way, and just push it in until it snaps. Snap, and a zip tie here, and that'll do it. And you put the dipstick back in if you took it out. And now we're ready to refill. So before we do that, just to recap, since there was a lot of connections, you want to make sure you have all of your hoses connected. There was the upper radiator hose, the lower radiator hose, the lower radiator hose to the bottom of the water pump, and then that connection from the water pump over, that would be this hose here, to the auxiliary water pump. And then if you have the oil cooler hose way down there. So you want to make sure you have all of those hoses connected. And now for our coolant refill. You want to get a coolant that's compatible with the system. I use Xerox G05 by Valvoline. It's good for Mercedes-Benz. I've used it before. There's other options too. This is just what I use. And of course you could always use the Mercedes-Benz and antifreeze coolant. I get the concentrated. You'll see that this is available in 50/50, which they usually call pre-diluted or concentrated. The concentrated is usually maybe just a couple bucks more, but you get twice as much because this is 1 gallon. You mix the concentrated coolant with 1 gallon of distilled water, not spring water, not drinking water, only distilled water because it doesn't have any of the minerals in it. You mix 1 gallon of the distilled water with 1 gallon of the Xerox, and you end up with 2 gallons of coolant that can go directly into the system. If you get the mixed 50/50, then you won't be dealing with the water at all. You'll just be opening it up and pouring it into your system. If you measured what you drained, it's probably somewhere around 2.5 gallons. So you're going to need whatever you decide to do. Whether it's concentrate or pre-diluted, you're going to need about 2.5 gallons. If you're wondering what it means to mix coolant, to mix the concentrate with distilled water, It's just as simple as it sounds. You're going to mix equal volumes. So for this example, this is, what do I have here? I'll just mix up a liter just to show you. So here's the liter mark, and there is the 500 milliliter or half liter mark. So I'll fill up halfway with Xerox and halfway with the distilled water, and that's all there is to it. So it's literally just mixing it in equal volumes. And there's 500. And I'll take my distilled water and bring it up to a liter. There's a liter. That's it. That's all there is to mixing coolant. Now this can go directly into the system. So with my coolant ready to go, whether it's mixed like I just did or whether you're pouring in with the pre-diluted, it's going to go right in here. Now there are baffles in this expansion tank, so don't pour it too fast because it'll get a little backed up. And we're gonna keep adding coolant until, well, you listen there. You hear those air bubbles? We're gonna be displacing a lot of air. I'm at about 2 gallons, a little bit more than 2 gallons now, and you can see bubbling over here. But what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna squeeze that top radiator hose. Okay, see all those bubbles from me squeezing it? Couple times, and that'll help to bleed it even more. See how the coolant levels dropped? So I'll go in, keep adding coolant. Now I can reach down and grab the bottom radiator hose here and see if that'll help bleed it some. Just squeezing it, and then also the auxiliary hose that's next to it. I've already done that a couple times, but that'll just help accelerate the process if you do this while you're refilling. Now we can reconnect this battery. Make sure that nobody put your key in the ignition while you were working. So you don't want to reconnect the battery while the key is in the ignition. This is a 10 millimeter. Make sure that's nice and snug, and we'll start her up. All right. And we will start her up. And we will go max. I'll voice over this part because the microphone is too sensitive to the engine noise. This is a quick safety note. If you're working on a model that has fans up here, just be aware that you don't get your shirt or hand or anything caught up in these fans because they will engage during the bleeding process. Here's a quick look at the belt and pulleys. You want to make sure everything looks good, no wobbles, no leaks. If there are, you want to stop and address that before continuing. Up here on the expansion tank, this spot in particular is where you want to look to see the bubbles. You can squeeze this top radiator hose even before the thermostat is open and you will see some bubbles there. Back in the cab here, as you can see, the engine temperature is still low. You can see the time there, it's been a few minutes. There's a little bit of heat coming out, but not a whole lot. Remember that the coolant level will rise due to the expansion of the coolant itself, but it will also drop due to displacement of the air bubbles. So you want to keep an eye on the level, and you want to keep it slightly above this cold mark like you see here. Again, back inside, you can see the clock here. It's been a few minutes, and now I'm going to give a little throttle, just up to about 1500, 2000 RPM, just to speed up that water pump impeller and to warm up the engine some. I have plenty of hot air coming out of the vents now, so I'm going to turn the heat off. That will allow us to get up to the engine operating temperature more quickly. The thermostat opens when the coolant is at about 87 degrees Celsius. We know that we're getting coolant through the heater core because we do have plenty of heat coming out the vents, so now we'll just turn the heat off for a little while so we can get the engine warmer. Back outside, I've been adding coolant as needed. I just want to keep that level, like I said, at above that cold line. You can now see there's some more air bubbles, and pretty soon the thermostat is going to fully open and we'll get the most bubbles at that point. Alright, now you can see the thermostat is fully opening. You can tell by the big rush of bubbles, and also you can look at the temperature gauge on the dash. I still have the heat off, and now I'll go back in the cab and just give a little bit more throttle to keep the engine temperature in that range. And then I'll turn that interior heat back on, and I'll leave it on, run it for a few minutes, then turn it off, etc. The idea is just to put the system through different conditions to maximize the bleed. You can see a lot of bubbles are coming out now, and I'm revving the engine up to about 1500 RPM. There's a big bubble there. And again, keep an eye on your coolant level. You can see how much it dropped after the thermostat opened because we got so many air bubbles out. In total, I added about 1 liter of coolant during this bleed process, but I'll get into the coolant levels a little bit later. So you can see we're still in the operating temperature range, and you can see the time to have an idea about how long this is taking. I always like to bleed coolant systems for at least 30 minutes, but I'll spend a little bit more time than that on this bleed. Here I'm revving the engine a little bit, and then I'll turn the heat back on. Again, it's just a matter of cycling through these different engine conditions. You can see here that the coolant level has dropped, and now you can see what it looks like after I added a little bit of coolant to get it back above that cold mark. And again, the coolant level is dropping due to the displaced air bubbles. If it's dropping very quickly, you might have a leak, so make sure that you don't have a leak. Now I'm going to do the final cycle. I'll get back in the cab with the heat on and rev the engine for a little bit, then I'll turn the heat off, then return to idle, then I'll rev with the heat off, etc., and just go through a few combinations for about a minute or two. And the goal is to verify that I'm not seeing any more bubbles. If you have a friend, you can have them either on the throttle or watching the tank, but obviously here I'll use the camera to just record the whole process and then review the camera, and as soon as I see that there are not any bubbles, then we're pretty close to a full bleed. So she's shut off now, but this auxiliary coolant pump is still going to run. It's going to run, and you can, this is going to be hot, so be careful, but you can feel that it's running by holding on to that there. That's pretty hot. You might hear like a gurgle gulp noise right after you, actually you can hear that there, getting some more bleeding. And that's because we got to bleed this yet. So that'll be done in this process as that coolant pump runs. So I let the auxiliary coolant pump run until it did its cycle. You won't be able to hear it running anymore. Then it went in, turned the engine on, let it run for like 30 seconds, shut it off, and then now you can hear it's still running because I just shut it off, but it's not, I'm not getting that tapping sound from the air bubbles. A couple more starts will be needed to clear this line completely, but it's probably pretty close already. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and let the coolant cool down. Coolant expands when it gets hot, so you'll notice that the coolant level will drop. She's been setting for about an hour now, and you can see the coolant level has gone down some. I added just a little bit of coolant, so I'm just a little over the cold line because it is still a little bit warm even though it's been cooling. And I'm going to put the lid back on here and go for a drive. I'm going to bring coolant with me just in case I need to add some. But it goes without saying, if you need to add coolant, shut the engine off and leave it off for at least half hour, 45 minutes to let it cool before you open up this cap. You want to have a look under and make sure that you don't have any coolant leaks. Alright, so I took her for a drive. As you can see there, put about 23 miles on. Engine temperature was good. I stopped about, I think, four times along the way running errands and checked the coolant level each time. And it was good, so now she'll set overnight, cool down all the way. I'll take one last look at the coolant level in the morning and then just kind of keep an eye on it for the next couple days, just in case there's some more bleeding that happens. And now she's been sitting overnight. Everything is completely cool. You can see we're right at the cold level line. So today I'm going to take her out on some more errands. I'll bring some coolant with me just in case, but I think we're pretty much set. So this ML's been on quite a few drives over the last week. The coolant level has stayed where it needs to be. My total refill was 10 liters, so that's a little bit more than 2.5 gallons. During the process of bleeding it, I added about 1.2 liters. I haven't had any leaks, haven't had any overheating or any problems like that. If you have any problems where you're getting some overheating, redo your bleed, because if you don't bleed the system properly, those air bubbles can cause some overheating effects. So if you didn't do a full bleed, as I mentioned, I like to bleed these systems for at least half an hour. In this particular case, I think it was closer to 45 minutes or even a little bit longer bleeding this out. But that ended up paying dividends because I just really just had to do that initial bleed and then the 2 restarts to bleed the auxiliary pump, and just a very little bit to add after a few drives. So it's worth putting in the time to do a proper bleed on the system. So I hope this video was helpful for you with your water pump replacement and any other items you did up here. Be sure to check the channel for that oil filter housing seal and the cooler seals and that pressure port seal. I got a video up for that. I'm hoping to have some more videos up on the M113, M112 engine group soon, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching and good luck with your repair.